In the IELTS speaking test, how would you answer the question, how often do you check your email? I can answer this question with 2 words by saying every day. It's the truth, but that answer would score terribly in the IELTS test. So in this episode, I'm going to give you a range of suggestions for ways that you can expand your answer and achieve a higher score. Hi, my name's Vic and this is episode 6 of the IELTS with Vic podcast. You'll find the links to my YouTube channel and blogs in the show notes, so make sure to check those out later. And if you want a free copy of the podcast transcript, then head over to my IELTS blog to request it. Right then, let's get stuck into today's topic. My first thought when asked about my email is, which one? As I have multiple email accounts for different purposes. I have 2 accounts for personal matters and then several others related to work. In a previous job, I also had to work across multiple shared email inboxes, which I dipped into constantly throughout the day. I think having multiple email accounts is probably a fairly common thing these days, so I'm sure this is something many of you can relate to, and this definitely gives us something extra to talk about in the exam. If you wanted to, you could even mention the email providers you use and whether you have a favourite. For example, I might say that I use both Outlook and Gmail these days, but that Gmail is my preferred provider because I also regularly use the YouTube Studio, which is linked to my Gmail. How about you? Which providers do you use and do you have any preferences? Focusing back in on the question then, we want a good score for task completion, so we need to talk about how often we check our email. Some keywords and phrases relevant to talking about frequency include once, twice, 3 times per day or per week, multiple times a day, several times per hour, constantly, occasionally, rarely, never. I included rarely and never in there because I know a few people who check their email a lot less than I do. For example, I have a friend who almost never checks his email. This is something I personally find hard to imagine, but perhaps you're similar to my friend and don't need to check your email so often. Even if you never check your email, you can still give a well-developed answer in the exam by stating this clearly and then saying why. For my friend, it's because all of his bills are sent in paper form to his house, and most of his personal communication happens via WhatsApp and social media. So email isn't really an important medium of communication for him. How about you? Is email an important method of communication for you, or do you use other methods of communication? For example, I worked in one organisation where everything internal was communicated via Teams rather than email. In that job, I checked my email a lot less frequently than I do these days. If you're stuck for something to say in the exam, you could do what I just did and talk about a previous experience where you checked your email either more or less frequently than now. Making comparisons is a great way to demonstrate your English ability. For me, a major factor that influences how often I check my different accounts is which device they are logged in on. Most of my work happens via my laptop, and I only use my mobile phone for personal matters. So, during working hours when I'm sitting at my laptop, I tend to check each of my work-related accounts at least twice during the morning and again in the afternoon. I'm logged into the browser versions and just periodically open them just to have a look to see if anything new came in. However, outside of typical office hours, these accounts tend not to get checked as often. My personal email is a whole different story though, because it's logged in on my phone. I check this one multiple times every day, rather than just on days when I'm working. And although I've never actually counted how many times I open that app, in a typical day, it's probably well into double figures. Also, unlike my work email, I might check my personal email really early in the morning or quite late at night, just because it's right there on my phone and easy to access. How about you? At what times of day do you tend to check your email? And is this the same every day of the week, or does it change on weekends, for example? As we can see then, mentioning how many times per day, how many days per week, and at what time of day we check our email are 3 possible ways to expand our answer in the test. Something else that has an impact for me is whether I'm waiting for an important email to come through. That could be related to something administrative, or it could just be I'm waiting for a delivery. Where I live at the moment, there is a pretty high chance of a parcel getting stolen from the doorstep. So, on days when I'm waiting for a delivery, I refresh my email inbox obsessively. I'm sure more than a few people listening can relate to that. I personally tend to check my email a lot less when I'm on vacation, especially those work emails. When I'm working for an employer, I prefer to hold a strict boundary around answering emails during vacation periods. Strict in the sense that I just don't. I believe downtime is an important aspect of my work-life balance. However, perhaps you are someone with a management role in an organisation which requires you to respond to emails quickly during evenings, weekends and vacation time. It really depends on our personal situation as to when we are expected to be answering emails. So this is definitely something that you could talk about in the exam in order to expand your answer and give it that personal touch. For example, a friend of mine runs her own business and she likes to keep a really close eye on her email inbox. She gets instant notifications on her phone when new emails come in and will take time to respond to her customers as soon as possible. She takes her business really seriously and likes to be responsive to her customers. In contrast, I've disabled the notifications on both my phone and laptop, so I only know there are emails if I go in and manually check. This suits my personality better, as when I'm in the flow of what I'm doing, I don't like to be disturbed by notifications. How about you? Is your email on your phone? And do you have the notifications turned off or on? Mentioning whether you manually check or respond to notifications is another way that you might choose to expand your answer in the exam. Also, mentioning your reason for checking often or not is another way you could find to build your answer. Although this question focused on how often we check our email, we haven't mentioned anything yet about responding to emails. Personally, I'm quite ruthless about spam and junk mail. I delete anything that's not important as soon as I spot it, as I like having a tidy inbox. I tend to reply to emails as soon as I can once they arrive, where possible, just because I don't want them to build up too much. Perhaps you might choose to expand your answer by saying not only how often you check your email, but also how quickly you choose to respond. It's a naturally linked topic and gives you something else to say. To summarise then, to expand your answer you could mention whether you have multiple email accounts, what they relate to and how often you check them, and at what time of day. You could also mention which devices you use to check them and whether there is anything that changes your normal routine. Additionally, you might mention whether you use device notifications, what your motivation is for checking your email the amount that you do, and how quickly you tend to respond. You don't need to try and force all of these aspects into your answer. These are just some ideas for things you might choose to include. I think if you tried to include everything mentioned today, your answer might become a short essay. So include the aspects that make most sense in your own personal situation. Now that we're coming to the end of the episode, I highly recommend taking a few minutes to create your own expanded answer to the question, how often do you check your email? If you like, you can post your answer in the comments, and then I can give you some feedback on it. So go ahead, tell us about how often you check your email in the comment section. Thanks for joining me today, and don't forget, if you want a free copy of the podcast transcript, then head over to my IELTS blog and fill in the form. See you next episode for more phrases and tips to level up your IELTS speaking test score and achieve your English learning goals. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.